Hi everyone, welcome to my channel. If you're new here, welcome back. If you're a returning viewer or subscriber, today's video is going to be part 3 in my quarterly reading wrap up where I run through 5 books that I loved the most throughout the season. So we've done January, February, March was one, April, May, June as another, and then we're up to number 3, which is July, August, September. Gradually each quarter's got worse in terms of my reading, so I don't have a single 5-star to mention here. I remember in quarter 2 I was complaining about the fact I only had 2 5-stars. Girl, like I wish I had 2 5-stars. 3 4s and 2 4.5s, so definitely a worse reading quarter than the previous 2. Still got some good books, obviously, like 4 stars are really good reads, and I feel like I've got some 5 stars on the horizon. Maybe we'll have a really strong latter quarter of the year to round things up, but for now I've got 5 books to mention here, 4 physical and 1 ebook, which I'd love to get physically as well. By the way, we're going in order of least favourite to most favourite, but obviously these are my top 5 of the season or of the 3 months. The first one is Happy Place by Emily Henry. Hold your horses. I'm not another girly obsessed with Emily Henry. I really don't like her. No, that sounds so rude. I just really don't get on with her books. I always run through this, but Beach Read was a 2, Book Lovers was a 3, and then You and Me on Vacation was a 4.5. This one was a 4. So we've definitely had like a very mixed bag with Emily Henry, but in general, like I'd say I'm not a fan of her work, even though I've got like a 50-50 ratio. I feel like because I had such a bad experience with Beach Read, and that's like the fan favourite, I feel like I just don't mesh well with her writing, but like I said, I have enjoyed a couple. I've been reading her books in chronological order in terms of like when they were published. Really noticed like her gradual increase in terms of like her writing abilities, and I feel like Book Lovers was a big jump in terms of writing, but the jump from Book Lovers to Happy Place was also huge. This writing is great. It definitely feels like a different narrative style from her previous work, and I feel like maybe that's the reason why I liked it. Also, like, I just enjoyed the character study in this. It was a very emotional time, and I don't know, I'm still catching up on annotations, but you can see like all my tabs, there's so many at the beginning here. So Happy Place follows Harriet and Wynne. They met through mutual friends, and every single year them and their mutual friends go on a holiday where they go out to stay at one of the friends' holiday house, or maybe it's her father's house or something. No, I think it's her father's holiday house. And they do this every single year, but for reasons which we find out throughout the book, not every single person has been able to make it in the past few years. So when the friend whose family owns a house finds out that her family is selling the house, she decides to really rally every single person together and get them to go on one last holiday to kind of celebrate their friendship, but also to mourn the end of this like era in their lives because of the loss of the house. Harriet and Wynne have been dating and they live together, but unbeknownst to their friend in this current timeline, they've broken up. Really, really difficult, because what they decide to do is basically fake date across this trip in an effort to like please other people pretty much. They want to make this a really special trip, particularly for the girl whose family owns a house, and they put their own feelings aside, like very much to the side, in order to make everybody else feel better. Basically, they're going through an extremely difficult thing. I can only like imagine what that would be like. Harriet and Wynne haven't seen each other since the breakup. The breakup circumstances were very, very weird. They were super, super close, and then Wynne just like calls out of the blue and over like a 2-minute phone call breaks up with Harriet. So she doesn't know who he is anymore. She feels like she's like so misled by what she thought she knew of him, and on top of that he has got like buried secrets that like we slowly also uncover throughout the book. Also, each of the friends within the friendship group, I think there's 4 of them because it's 2 other couples, have their own stories, and there's so many complex layers to what's going on and like the dynamics within the friendship group. So we're following this across the present timeline of these like few days while they're on holiday, and then we're also flashing back in the past of when Harriet and Wynne first met, and then also the consequent like summers following that. Such a beautiful book. A really, really interesting look at the relationship dynamics, like I said, but also the things that draw you together, and whether you're just like in something because you're comfortable with it, or whether your friendships are actually ones that you're wanting to participate in. I feel like the ending of this really dropped off, and that's the reason why it was a 4 instead of a 5, because it really gave me 5-star feels to begin with. The chapters of Harriet and Wynne falling in love, I think the particular one, I think I just passed it. Yeah, chapter 7 is the one where we see them kind of bantering with each other before they're properly dating, and that was like the most beautiful depiction of 2 people at the start of something that I think I've ever seen. It was so, so well written and really incredible. Definitely more of like a character study than a light, fluffy romance. Quite heartbreaking at points. There are lots of sad things we deal with. I did actually predict something would happen towards the end that was like way more heartbreaking than what did happen, but it still like emotionally hit me. I think I teared up at points, and I would highly recommend it, especially if you've had a go with some Emily Henry books and you haven't fully got on with them. Then Happy Place is like a good place to start, I feel like. Book number 4 has a similar theme to Happy Place. I don't know, what would you call this? Like, this is a general fiction book. It's not a romance, but it's like centering a relationship, and that is After I Do by Taylor Jenkins Reid. So this follows a married couple, Lauren and Ryan. They met in college, they fell in love there, and they've been together ever since. They got married very, very soon after, and they've just had happy, blossoming relationship, really, really steady marriage. But we flash forward into the future, 10 years into their marriage, and their marriage is on the brink. They hate each other, to put it lightly. Every single little thing that the other person does drives them insane. And one day they sit down, discuss it, and they're like, yeah, me too. And instead of suffering through it or getting a divorce, they decide to separate from each other for the period of a year and work on themselves and maybe learn to love the other person through that. You know, how much they miss the other person, whether they want to invest their time and energy into keeping this relationship going, but also being away from each other because they're so destructive to each other because of how much they don't like each other. I said each other so many times. Yeah, really, really difficult book again. Watching two people who like deep down still love each other, but like it's just so far hidden beneath the layers of their annoyance and their hurt and their kind of resentments that have built up throughout the relationship over not just the decade of marriage, but also the time that they were dating. Ryan seems like the biggest pain in the neck to begin with. Then you slowly start to discover that Lauren actually is kind of that way as well. By the end, you have like sympathy for both the characters. But yeah, just a really, really interesting kind of portrait of a marriage that's kind of gone wrong. And the idea of also like falling out of love with someone and whether that's something that you kind of give into or like accept when you've made this commitment to each other and you have dreams for your future, and that involves like being married to someone. They don't want to drop this thing they built, but they also like don't know where to go to make it better. So them taking time apart from each other allows them to see whether it's something they want to be working on. Yeah, I'm not going to spoil obviously what happens, but really, really interesting. Really recommend actually to people who want to get married, even if they're having like a difficult time with marriage, because I feel like this is something that you can look at this from a different point of view, and I feel like it brings up a lot of questions that were applicable to my own relationships. The only way this works is if both characters end up being on the same page towards the end. And obviously you can't change another person, but you can kind of give them the space and keep loving them and rediscover like your love for them through being apart. It's a really, really interesting study because I don't think this is something that many people would do. It's just like kind of out there. So it's kind of interesting to see it played out within fiction. Book number 3 is one that I don't actually have with me, and that is What Is Mine by Jose Enrique Bortoluci. Completely different vibe from these past few. This one is a non-fiction book. It's kind of like a biography of sorts. We're following this guy as he interviews his father, or he has a conversation with his father, and his father was a truck driver across Brazil. By the way, I'll have all the wrap-ups for July, August and September linked down below. But in the wrap-up I did for this book, in the month that I read this book, I absolutely ranted on and on about it, how much I loved it, like every single part of it, and why it was so fascinating to me. The whole life of a truck driver is insane. It's such a different reality from what most of us live. So seeing that depicted in this book that was like so full of love and care because it came from the point of view of a son, it spun a little bit of a different narrative on top of what we have seen of truck drivers like within the media or even within like society. The sort of people you assume them to be, or like the grueling work hours, the time spent away from family, everything like that. As well as that, there's a really big like contextual historical lens, because a lot of what the father was doing was driving across the distance of Brazil as the Trans-Amazonian Highway was built. If you're not aware, it's the highway that runs through the Amazon rainforest. Massive time of change for Brazil, also for the world, seeing the destruction of the rainforest, basically for like the wood, but also for farming and as a way to like carry things across a vast space. On top of this, Bortoluci's father is dying. He has cancer. It's very advanced. It's very aggressive. So this really does feel like the final conversations between a father and a son. So there's definitely that kind of personal touch, not touch, like it's absolutely smothering this. And it's just such a beautiful way of looking at two people who perhaps, you know, career-wise and like even economically are so different from one another, but have this bond of blood to draw each other together. I just loved every single second of it, and I highly, highly recommend it. Would love to own a physical copy. It's really short as well, so definitely recommend. But I'm sure even if this is not something that you're interested in, like initially interested in, you will be by like page 2 of this book. It's so well written and really, really immersive and captivating. Okay, book number 2 is The Ballad of Never After by Stephanie Garber. This is a fantasy book. It is the second book in the Once for a Broken Heart trilogy. Stephanie Garber is one of my favourite authors. I love her so much. I've never had a 5-star read from her, but all of her books have been everything. The Caraval series is a really, really solid, strong YA fantasy series, and this one is like a little spin-off from that. So I don't know, you don't have to read the Caraval series before this one, but I mean, I'd highly recommend it because I feel like you're missing out on a really good thing if you're skipping it, and it's much worse like to read the series and then go back to the Caraval series because you will have spoiled so much of that series for yourself through reading this one first. So that's my little take on it. But yeah, beyond that, this is the second book in the series, like I said, so it's, you know, it has the risk of second book syndrome, but it really doesn't have that feel at all. The first book was a 4-star read for me. This one felt very similarly to that, and then the ending was just like insane. It was so good. I feel like this book is like, or this series is like pitched as like romantasy, but we really don't get much of the romance throughout book 1. Book 2 comes into play, particularly towards the end, and like my tabs just like speak for themselves, I feel, because I adored this book. It was so much fun. I also buddy read this with someone and I read a lot of this aloud to them, and I really enjoyed that experience as well. It really brought the story to life, particularly because it feels like very fairy tale-esque. So reading it aloud feels like you're reading someone like a bedtime story. In fact, I did do it in the evening quite a bit. But yeah, in this series we're following Jax and Evangeline. Evangeline is this young girl. She is absolutely head over heels in love with this man, but he announces that he's getting married to someone else. Heartbroken, she flees to the temple of the Prince of Hearts, Jax, and she not prays to him but like speaks to him and requests his assistance to basically break up these people or like redirect this guy back to her, because that's who she thinks is like her soulmate, her one true love. Jax intervenes in the situation in a good way but also a terrible way, because of course, like with all people who are a little bit like morally grey or very morally grey, there are catches and there are like terms and conditions to them assisting you. So he messes her life up basically, and one of the things that he does is he says that he wants her to give 3 kisses in the time and place and to whom he chooses. She's like under this obligation to him and she has to kind of like follow him around or have him follow her around in order to like fulfill this thing. Lands her in like a lot more sticky situations. It redirects her life from what she thought was very like straightforward and simple. She just wanted this quiet life with this guy she loved. Her life does not end up like that, and slowly throughout the course of the series we see her fall in love with Jax. Evangeline is like so not the average kind of YA protagonist. She's not like some kick-ass female warrior. Sweet and gentle and kind and a little bit naive, but very like well-meaning. Shows that there's like strength in goodness basically, and I really enjoyed her character. I found her very refreshing, and I feel like that kind of just grew throughout this book because she kind of deviates away from Jax's plans but wants to get to the bottom of like this mystery that's going on by herself, even when he is not there to help her. There's some really beautiful quotes in this. It's just a really well written series and I'm so excited to read book 3 at some point. I'm not sure when, but yeah, this book was great. Highly recommend that series. And then the final book, book number 1, my favourite book of, I was going to say 2024, no, 2024 so far, but in the last 3 months, is Swift and Saddled by Lyla. If you told me that a romance book would be my number 1 favourite book of the past 3 months, I really don't think I would believe you. I don't love romance. There's like 3 that are my favourites, but beyond that, usually they're pretty mid or bad. So having a romance book, particularly this one actually, is pretty amazing for me. So the first book in this series is Done and Dusted. This is a series of cowboy romance books. They're all interconnected standalone, so you can read them separately, but it's recommended obviously that you go in order, because like the characters from book 1 are in book 2 and the characters from book 1 and 2 are in book 3, etc. But the first book, Done and Dusted, was a 3 stars, but honestly at points it was like a 2.5. All you need to take from that is that it was just like not good. After that book, like I had to go for a lit fic because I was just like in despair at how badly written it was. Being gifted this book, I knew I wanted to give it a go, but I also was like, yikes, I'm gonna hate this. Went into it, read it in 24-hour readathon video. You reach a point within that where you're like, I don't want to read another page or another word even, but I loved it. I loved it so much, and it was like one of the last books I read in the readathon, so even throughout the bits where I was like struggling, I wanted to read this. It was so good. So in this book we're following Ada and we're following Weston. Weston lives on a ranch with it's owned by his father, and he lives there with his brother and his brother's best friend. And Weston's always felt like other people have had like a very defined career path, they have very defined like interests, things are going well for them, but for him he's like a little bit quieter and he's much more interested in like supporting the people around him than being some like entrepreneur or whatever. However, his one thing that he's kind of interested in is this like decrepit property on the ranch which really wants to do up and turn into a guest house. He's happy to run the whole thing, but he needs help in like designing the interior of it, oversee the project of restoring it basically. And so he calls in Ada. So she travels over to this small town, to this ranch. She's basically the project manager for this. Night 1 in the town, she goes up for a drink at the local bar and she sees this guy across the bar and she's like, yep, you're kind of fine. She makes out with him to the point where she's like on the verge of having a one night stand, and then she's like, no, I've got to go home because I've got to get up early for my new job. Turns up with a new job the next morning, and who is it? Who's managing it? But the guy who she made out with in the bar and almost had a one night stand with. So immediately she's like highly embarrassed, doesn't have a past of like acting like this, so she's worried that she's given like a terrible first impression. From day 1 he's got like the fattest crush on her in the world. She's got a lot of issues because she's actually divorced and her husband was low-key kind of abusive. He has separate issues because he deals very heavily with his mental health. He suffers with depression quite a serious way, and he's on like medication and he goes to therapy for it and things like that. But so he has it kind of under control, but he also is like fearful of having like another depressive episode. I loved it because he presents as a really happy, positive person. Everyone's like in shock when they find out that he has depression. It switches the idea of like what mental illness is and how someone can like live a fully functioning life if they like are doing the proper things to kind of take care of their mental health, even if the issue they have is a pretty extreme one. This book was like the perfect fun little cowboy romance, but there was so much depth to it. There were so many layers. Each of the characters felt really fleshed out, like real people you could meet. I love how much of a softie Weston was, and I loved Ada's character. She doesn't want to be tied down basically, and she's so fearful of having anything to do with Weston, and she's so inspired to like boost her career and doing this project and like trying to do the best job she can, and introducing a relationship on top of that is like too much for her. Weston is very much like me in personality. I'm not going to go further in depth with that really, but I just saw a lot of similarities between myself and him. I never ever relate to characters in books, so that was a really special thing. This was a 4.5 just because I really don't like the spice in this series. It's just so bad. Oh my gosh, too much. And also just these people have like personality shifts, like 180 personality shifts, and I just don't like that. I'm not really a spice gal, so having like a book that's like a lot of that, it's kind of slow burn, and the second it starts it's like always there. It's not my favorite thing in the world, so really highly enjoyed this. Definitely like the surprise of this century. That was crazy that I really, gosh, that was crazy that I really enjoyed that. 4 books plus What Is Mine that I loved throughout the past 3 months. I highly recommend all of these. Maybe Swift and Settled is slightly more of like a personal read. I don't know how other people would get on with it. Like I still think it's a really good book, like aside from how much I related to it and whatever. Maybe this is like realistic, like a 4 instead of a 4.5. I hope you enjoyed the video. Give it a thumbs up if you did. Subscribe if you'd like to stick around and see more from me. I am going to be filming one more of these books. I'm going to be filming one more of these videos at the very end of the year, and then I'm going to run through all the books that I read throughout the year and give my ratings and things like that, and a little line on each. If you want to see the previous ones of these, I'll have the videos linked down below. I'll also have linked down below my video where I run through all the books that I had read so far in the year, like the halfway point, because those are like little mini wrap-ups where I just like say like 1 line, star rating, things like that on each book. If you want like a little view into kind of my reading taste and like what I've been getting to this year. Thank you so much for being here. Sending my love to you from here to wherever you may be in the world, and happy reading. Let me know if you have read anything recently that you think I'd like, or other people in the comments would like. Bye bye.